Comrades. Okay, this is, I'm going to introduce Mike Gimbel here. This is a talk on left unity. And I can read Mike's bio here. Mike was a red diaper baby. Woody Guthrie, Cisco Houston, and Mike's father were dubbed the Three Musketeers. Mike's mother got out the worker when it was banned. Mike's mother secretly had possession of the mailing list. Mike's mother also recruited Harry Belafonte, amongst others, into the CP. Mike's two brothers court-martialed in the Korean War. His older brother, the merchant seaman during the McCarthy witch hunt, spoke on the dais at Madison Square Garden in opposition to the kicking out of communists from the NMU. Mike dropped out of college in January 1965 to organize against the Vietnam War. In December 1967, Mike joined Workers' World Party and remained an active member of WWP for more than 45 years, participating in many historic events and actions. In 1972, Mike was elected president of the second largest union chapter in Local 375 ASME while working in New York City's Department of Environmental Protection. Local 375 represents almost 7,000 professional and technical workers in New York City government. Mike served on 8 union negotiating teams and for a short period was the head of that negotiating team. Mike, for many years, was a delegate to the New York Central Labor Council. Mike retired in 2007, but remains active in the union and is currently the appointed chairperson of the union's Labor Community Union Committee. Mike is co-coordinator of the May 1st Coalition for Worker and Immigrant Rights. The May 1st Coalition organizes the huge annual rallies and marches that start from Union Square in New York City on May 1st. Concurrently with the above union and political work and DEP employment, Mike wrote an annual book from 1990 to 1994 entitled Mike Gimbel's Baseball Player and Team Ratings, and was hired as the primary advisor to the general manager of the Boston Red Sox and Montreal Expos Major League Baseball teams from 1991 to 1997 in regards to player evaluation and player acquisition. Mike was Moneyball prior to the Moneyball pictured in the hit movie of that name. Concurrently with the union and baseball work, Mike became alarmed by the nonsense that was being popularized as the new physics. Mike was shocked by the idealism being passed off as the new physics. Mike spent several years investigating the background of this sad situation for science. His book, Dialectical Materialism versus the New Physics, is the product of that research. And it's on sale here at the bookstore. Currently, Mike does statistical analysis of the employment information published by the U.S. Department of Labor and the Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS. Mike distributes the results of his analysis by email and on Facebook. Mike's analysis shows that the current unemployment rate is actually 15.775%, not the 6.68 reported by the BLS. On a side note, Mike has a home that is also a menagerie with 7 internal ponds, some having large crocodilians present and ducks and rabbits running around inside the home. Mike is married and lives in Northeast Pennsylvania. Ladies and gentlemen,
once again, I want to thank John and Karen for inviting me here, and thank you for coming in to listen. As you can see from my bio, I have a long history of activism in the Marxist-Leninist movement. Several months ago, I came to the conclusion that it was imperative to begin a discussion of how to rebuild a Leninist movement, both nationally and internationally, due to the disastrous situation that working people face as a result of the triumph of U.S. imperialism in the Cold War. U.S. imperialism is trying to establish a worldwide Pax Americana, which would be a disaster for all working and poor people. This crisis is why I am here to speak to you. I watched with horror as openly pro-Nazi forces in Kiev, in the Ukraine, are praised by the big business corporate media. These pro-Nazi forces, wearing Waffen-SS insignia, with massive demonstrations of skinheads carrying pictures of their hero, Nazi collaborator Stefan Bandera, tearing down statues honoring the Soviet soldiers who defeated Hitler, and tearing down statues of Lenin and destroying the Communist Party headquarters in Kiev and taking out the books and burning the books in a pile in the street and raising the U.S. Confederate flag in the Kiev City Hall, all while the corporate media praises them to the skies. These forces are now in high positions in the coup government of the Ukraine. It would be as if, here in the US, KKK and Nazi forces, perhaps under the cover of the Tea Party, had stormed the Congress and the White House and torn down all the statues to Martin Luther King and Abraham Lincoln and to General Grant and the Union soldiers that defeated the Confederacy, and raised the flag of the Confederacy in the halls of Congress after chasing the elected president from the country. Wouldn't any person with common sense understand that fascism was involved, not bourgeois democracy, let alone anything progressive? Shouldn't all progressives and communists have taken notice and taken steps to answer this attack from fascism, which is backed by US-led imperialism? Just because this fascist attack took place thousands of miles away from our shores does not make the danger any less. We are internationalists, aren't we? And we know that the capitalist and imperialist ruling classes are also internationalists. What happens thousands of miles away are just warnings of what is intended for us as well. Communism cannot afford to look at today's worldwide political situation with rose-colored glasses. We cannot continue to work in the old way. That is what has gotten us into our current trouble. My talk is an appeal to all Leninists for the creation of a unified Leninist party as the only way to deal properly with this crisis that is harming the workers all over the world. There has been too much of a decades-long, non-Marxist, semi-religious retreat into sectarian camps, which have devolved into the use of ad hominem and unprincipled attacks on both Stalin and Trotsky as a way to avoid unity. This bourgeois type of analysis, masquerading as Marxism-Leninism, mostly analyzes the words and actions of leaders rather than an understanding that those words and actions are determined by economics. Economics determines politics. The economic substructure determines what the politicians say and do. That is as true in a worker state as it is true in a capitalist state. To not understand the scientific basis for Marxism is to be a liberal, not a revolutionary. It was the economic and military isolation of the Soviet Union that brought it down, despite the huge economic gains made under the workers' rule and a centrally planned economy. The conservative Soviet bureaucracy, which ran the Soviet Union, did not arise out of thin air. The conservative Soviet bureaucracy was a product of that forced isolation and the extreme backwardness of the country at the time of the revolution. Whatever the internal problems of the Soviet Union, the USSR, while it existed, was an inspiration to the revolutionary movements all over the world. The overthrow of the worker states in Eastern Europe and in the Soviet Union from 1989 to 1991 has been the greatest defeat for the working class in its entire history. When we see U.S. imperialism sponsoring an openly fascist coup in the Ukraine, we must realize that we are at a critical moment in human history. What we do today will have huge implications for the future well-being of the working class all over the world. If the coup in the Ukraine allows NATO to expand further east, then capitalist Russia itself is unlikely to be able to withstand the pressure. U.S. imperialism will do what it needs to do by using right-wing elements inside of Russia to destabilize Russia and eliminate the much weaker Russian imperialist opposition to U.S. imperialism. If U.S. imperialism were successful in drawing Russian capitalism under its control, this would be a disaster for the Palestinians, for Iran, for Syria, for Venezuela, for Cuba, and would further economically and militarily isolate China. U.S. imperialism is the main enemy of the working class of the entire world. It is the reservoir of political reaction for the entire world. U.S. imperialism, however, is a giant with clay feet. U.S. imperialism is stripping its own economy in order to pay for its military might and is using criminal-style mafia protection to force the nations of the world to accept its highly overvalued currency. In so doing, it is pauperizing its own working class and allowing its internal infrastructure to crumble. The U.S. working class is becoming more and more angry over its exploitation. The problem for the U.S. working class today is that it has little or no idea that it is a class, let alone a class that is ideologically developed enough to mount a fight back so as to defend itself. The U.S. labor leadership is afraid of the term socialist, even as they try to fight against privatization of public services. Yet socialism is public ownership, and the purpose of the Cold War was to defeat public ownership of the means of production, as it existed in the worker states. The labor leaders cannot begin to seriously fight privatization of public services without saying that they are for socialism. The two go together. In addition, the worldwide working class movement has been ideologically thrown back to the beginning when Marx and Engels first began to educate our class in regards to the class nature of capitalism. This lack of class consciousness is the result of the weakness of the Leninist movement after the overthrow of the Soviet Union. Without a powerful Leninist movement, there is no possibility for the development of class consciousness that is linked with an understanding that socialism is the answer. As such, the crying need for Leninist unity can no longer be ignored. Some want to take comfort in thinking that this worldwide capitalist economic crisis will solve all our political problems. That's a liberal's point of view, not a revolutionist's point of view. While it is true that the capitalist system has hit a brick wall due to its unsolvable economic crisis, that crisis has only made the capitalist ruling class even more dangerous and aggressive. The imperialist offensive in the Ukraine and in Syria shows that the U.S. imperialism will use Al-Qaeda and the Nazis without blinking an eye. We are at a very dangerous moment in history. U.S. imperialism is smashing country after country ever since the overthrow of the Soviet Union and the smashing of the worker states in Eastern Europe. Along with the smashing of entire countries like Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya, and Syria has come the smashing of the unions and the taking back of almost all the gains the workers won while the Soviet Union existed. Today, as a result of the imperialist victory in the Cold War, the 85 richest persons on the planet have as much wealth as the poorest half of the world, 3.5 billion people. No one can reasonably call this situation progress. Working people are poorer today all over the world than they were when the Soviet Union existed. And imperialism is more powerful today than at any time in history. It is so shocking to see how easy it has been for the imperialists to fool the masses with the language of democracy, while using the iron fist as a fascist street thugs in smashing countries like Yugoslavia and Iraq and Libya and Syria and now the Ukraine. It was painful to see how easy it was for the imperialists to use their propaganda machine in order to get the masses to welcome the vicious military coup in Egypt last summer. The recent Ukraine events are the most alarming so far. As I said, fascist gangs and Waffen-SS and so on and so forth. They're marching all over Ukraine and beating up leftists with support from the US and Germany and NATO, with the ultimate target of imperialism being capitalist Russia. Russia desires to be a capitalist rival to US imperialism, but the US empire will brook no competitor, be it socialist or capitalist. The overthrow of the Soviet Union was not done so that a new capitalist rival could challenge the US imperialist domination of the planet. The events in the Ukraine are but a preview of what is intended for Russia itself. As I said before, Russia has its own internal right wing that is quite willing to be at the service of US imperialism. The imperialists will not be satisfied by devouring the Ukraine. If they succeed, then the noose tightens on Russia itself. Fascism raises its head primarily during capitalist economic crises, when the petty bourgeois become the big economic losers, as the middle-class professionals and shopkeepers lose their customers, and thereby become angry and looking for someone to blame for their economic troubles. The blame for their economic problems, the economic problems of the cowardly petty bourgeois middle classes, can fall and often does fall on immigrants and on anyone seen to be too weak to fight back. The blame and anger of the bankrupted middle class can fall on gays or on national minorities like the black and brown people, as well as on Jews and the Roma. But most of all, the blame and anger will fall on the workers, and especially on the unions and on the communist parties and organizations. The rise of the fascist street thugs, without an equal and opposite rise of leftist militia to fight and defeat them, is a clear indication of the weakness of the left in the Ukraine and elsewhere. Although they're starting to organize, but it's not the same. The petty bourgeois middle class is a barometer of the political situation. The middle class is not a fundamental class. It is sandwiched between the two fundamental classes, the bourgeois classes and the working class. During an economic crisis, if the left is strong and leading a powerful revolutionary movement, the middle classes will follow the left. But if we are weak, they follow the fascists. Above all, the petty bourgeois middle class respects power, because that is how they survive and maneuver under capitalist rule. They will look to whichever class is strongest as the solution to their problems. In regards to winning the petty bourgeois to our side, our class has the advantage of having a realistic and optimistic program for the future. All the bourgeoisie can offer is continuing economic crisis without any optimism for the future. That is why we refer to those on the bourgeois side as reactionaries. This is why the bourgeois response in times of crisis is to arouse the fascist dregs as their protectors, while our appeal is always to progress and the future well-being of humanity. When we look around the world at this dangerous moment in history, what do we see? Do we see the needed efforts for unity in the Marxist-Leninist movement, or do we see a continued sectarianism, which is a leftover from the disastrous politics of the previous century? Unfortunately, we see sectarianism in the Leninist movement all over the world. There are numerous parties and groups and circles and individuals in this country and all over the world, all proclaiming themselves as Marxist-Leninists. Some of these groups do very good work in the mass struggle. However, some of these groups are hopelessly confused as to what Marxism means, and it shows in their political positions during a political crisis. Unfortunately, what we often see is expressed is not the internationalism and solidarity required for real Leninism, but rather the shameful and egotistical actions that divide us one from each other. If we ignore those groups and organizations and individuals that are hopelessly confused and are hopelessly sectarian, and concentrate on promoting Marxist-Leninist unity with those groups and individuals that are in agreement on the basic issues facing the working class in these difficult times, we can and should be able to begin the needed process of creating a united Marxist-Leninist Party that can begin the process of rebuilding the class consciousness of the working class. This proposed United Leninist Party is nothing original with me. We have seen it done before. That United Party is what led the Russian Revolution to success in October 1917, and in successfully defeating the invading capitalist armies and winning the civil war that followed the October Revolution. It is what existed under Lenin until his death in January 1924. The Central Committee of the Communist Party under Lenin included both Trotsky and Stalin and Zinoviev and Kamenev and Bukharin and many others, all working together despite huge differences in outlook. While Lenin lived, he fought mightily against fracturing of that unity within the Communist Party. It was due to that fear of a split that Lenin, on his deathbed, asked the Central Committee to remove Stalin as General Secretary, and in Lenin breaking off comradely relations with Stalin. Prior to the death of Lenin, even at the height of the Civil War, the Communist Party newspaper Pravda published the political positions of all the competing factions in the leadership of the Communist Party in regards to the questions that were to be decided at party conferences. No leader, including Lenin, was immune to having their political position attacked in articles in the party press in Pravda. Only after the party conference, after the vote on the issues was taken and the issues settled, were all the party members required, and factions required, to line up in support of that position. The measure to ban factions after the Kronstadt revolt in 1921 was only intended to be temporary, not permanent. The very fact that the vote was taken to ban faction shows that factions were accepted at the time of the revolution and during the Civil War. Any objective analysis of that vote shows that it was intended as just a temporary measure at the moment of the highest crisis for the new revolutionary government. It was the conservative Soviet bureaucracy that seized upon this temporary measure in order to make it permanent. That conservative Soviet bureaucracy developed due to the backwardness of the Soviet economy and the mass illiteracy of the population that existed at the time of the revolution. Bureaucracies prefer giving orders and having them carried out without question. A revolutionary party, however, depends on winning hearts and minds. A revolutionary party can only grow based on the voluntary and enthusiastic initiative of the oppressed. In order to obtain that enthusiasm, discussion and debate is a requirement in regards to winning that allegiance. We however, are in a different period and a completely different era from the revolutionary situation at the time of the Russian Revolution or the period of the 30s and World War II. One of the turning points occurred in 1956 when Khrushchev, speaking for the conservative Soviet bureaucracy, denounced Stalin. Had Trotsky been alive in 1956, he would have undoubtedly come to the defense of Stalin. Many of you may be shocked to hear me say this, but I can back that statement up. Khrushchev's attack on Stalin was really an attack on socialism itself. It was an attack meant to secure political privileges for the conservative and economically privileged Soviet bureaucracy. Under Stalin's police measures, the conservative and privileged Soviet bureaucracy had been prevented from speaking in their own voice by police measures. The conservative Soviet bureaucracy had to be content with Stalin's economic concessions to them while having to cower before Stalin's police powers over them. Once Stalin died, the conservative and privileged Soviet bureaucracy saw their opportunity and seized the moment to gain political freedom. When Khrushchev declared the end of the dictatorship of the proletariat and declared the Soviet Union as the state of the whole people, the managers in the state enterprises could now be elected to be the representatives of the workers in the Soviets. The USSR, when it existed, was like the AFL-CIO with state power. Khrushchev's reform was anti-worker, but because it was pro the privileged and conservative managerial caste. Khrushchev's reform would be the equivalent of a union allowing the managers to replace the workers as union officers. Yes, that's what that reform meant, because prior to that reform, only a worker could be a member of the Soviet. Now the managers could take that position and represent the workers that they're overseeing. Okay. These managers could now speak in their own name as a caste grouping inside the worker state and set policy in the worker's name that was actually the policy of the managers of the state enterprises and not the workers in those state enterprises. This was the first step towards the ultimate elimination of worker control over these state enterprises and towards the reimposition of private ownership, which occurred in 1991 when the Soviet Union was overthrown. Khrushchev followed up his denunciation of Stalin by releasing thousands of political prisoners, but only the anti-socialist right-wing prisoners from not the pro-socialist Trotskyists. They stayed in prison. Okay. Trotsky, had he been alive, would have immediately recognized this attack by Khrushchev on Stalin as being an attack on socialism, not Stalin. Trotsky would have immediately attacked Khrushchev's reforms as an attack on socialism. Trotsky would have appealed to all communists, be they followers of himself or Stalin, to unite so as to defend socialism in the country where it was born. This is the ABC of Marxism. The history of the communist movement, ever since the deaths of Lenin and Trotsky, has been a movement that has day by day, grown farther and farther away from the movement that created the Russian Revolution. That revolution and the government that revolution created, let me remind you, was led by a central committee that included Lenin, Trotsky, Stalin, Bukharin, Zinoviev, and Kamenev, and all the others. The successful revolution, the successful civil war, the defeat of the whites and everything. In other words, it was a revolutionary party that welcomed discussion and debate, and a party that had a left, a center, and a right. In fact, all Leninist parties require discussion and debate in order to grow. That requirement explicitly means that there has to be a left, a center, and a right. If you all agree, what's the point of discussion and debate? I mean, and you're not going to grow if you don't have the discussion. You can't come to a good conclusion. If we are to be a party, okay, if we are to be a party of the future that encourages new ideas, we must be open to that debate and discussion. That is the only way to win the broad allegiance of the masses. That model of a party that existed at the moment of the successful 1917 revolution, that's the model I think we want to follow. That's Lenin's model. Through the Civil War is the proper model to emulate, not the current model of sectarianism. That model is the proper model of a party that wishes to become a Leninist party that can lead millions of workers and the oppressed who come from many different backgrounds and cultures and histories and different levels of oppression in a common and united struggle against our capitalist enemy. The unity of the heterogeneous groups within the working class and within the oppressed cannot be obtained without discussion and debate and without factional differences. These differences cannot be overcome by giving orders or preventing debate. It should be remembered that for almost a decade after the split in the Soviet Party, Communist Party arose at the end of 1923, that Trotsky remained on the Central Committee until he was internally exiled in 1927, and continued thereafter to make every attempt to rejoin the leadership, and continually express the need for open debate in the party. Even in 1932, in exile, In an interview on Norwegian radio, Trotsky stated that he had worked with Stalin and would not deny it, would never deny it. It should also be remembered that at the time of the Munich Pact in 1937, between Hitler and Chamberlain and Daladier, that Trotsky recognized that this pact was an agreement between Britain and France and Germany to encourage the Nazis to attack the Soviet Union. As such, Trotsky stated that it would be a betrayal of the Soviet Union if Stalin did not sign his own treaty with Hitler to send the Nazi armies the other way. When the Hitler-Stalin Pact was signed, half the members of the Communist parties worldwide resigned from the communist movement of the Communist Party. Trotsky did not take that moment for the crisis in the Communist Party to try to gain the upper hand against Stalin by appealing to the resigned members to join his movement. Quite the contrary. Trotsky recognized that those that resigned from the Communist Party were moving to the right, not the left. Instead of taking an opportunist advantage, Trotsky came to the defense of the necessity of the pact and lost half his own members as well, for his defense of that pact. Trotsky's book, In Defense of Marxism, that was written to explain why Marxists were required to defend Stalin's signing of the pact, should be required reading for all communists. During the Civil War in Russia, Trotsky was the overall commander of the Red Army. As such, he was in charge of the Red Army when they had to crush the 1921 Kronstadt revolt. This is an example of why Trotsky, had he been alive, would have supported the Soviet intervention to put down the counter-revolution in Hungary in 1956. Those groups and parties that call themselves Trotskyists, who denounced the Soviet intervention in Hungary, would have been denounced by Trotsky had he been alive. As you can readily see, in the political dispute between Trotsky and Stalin, I am on the side of Trotsky. Does that mean that I cannot be a member of a party that includes the followers of Stalin? Of course not. If Trotsky and Stalin could work together successfully during the most revolutionary period of modern history, then why can't we work together? And work together we must. It is not a choice, it is a requirement. Any hesitation on this issue at this critical moment in history is the most tragic form of sectarianism. In fact, where events have allowed it, honest Trotskyists and honest Stalinists are working together right now. I am a co-coordinator in New York City of the May 1st Coalition for Worker and Immigrant Rights. I sit there together with followers of Stalin. We work together. We're good friends, despite completely different interpretations of the events surrounding the dispute between Trotsky and Stalin. Why are we able to work together so wonderfully on the May 1st Coalition and other coalitions? Because we do not allow sectarianism to pull us apart. If this is possible on day-to-day work in this coalition and several other issues and coalitions, then what is preventing us from creating that needed united party on a national and an international basis? The answer is simple. It is sectarianism. A united Leninist party is required if we wish to call ourselves internationalists, rather than just local and parochial activists. Really. We live in the country that is the center of imperialism. I am active in New York City, which is the capital of capitalism. To be a party with aspirations of internationalism, rather than just a local activist group, that party would have to be headquartered in New York City, where the heartbeat of capitalism resides. New York City is the stage where our actions can most easily be seen by the whole world, and where we can most directly confront the worldwide capitalist exploiters. The next question then becomes, what are the steps necessary to create that unified Leninist party? What would be the minimum program required for agreement as a basis for a united party? Imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism, as Lenin stated, and that is where we need to start our united program. Anyone can state today that they support the 1917 revolution and the 1949 Chinese revolution, but that is taken for granted and not a program for action today. We want to know first and foremost, as internationalists, is what is your group or individual attitude towards today's imperialism led by the U.S. military and economic juggernaut. An avowed communist who is not first and foremost an anti-imperialist opponent of U.S. imperialism, of the U.S. juggernaut, is not a real communist. One cannot call themselves a Leninist while failing to oppose, or worse still, even supporting the U.S.-sponsored rebels, be they in Libya, Syria, the Balkans, Venezuela, the Ukraine, or elsewhere. Therefore, unity requires a united program of opposition to U.S.-led imperialism as item number one. As such, we need agreed understanding that the enemy of the entire planet's workers and oppressors resides on Wall Street. Is that a tough requirement? I don't think so.
Can you say that again? Sorry.
The enemy of the entire planet's workers and oppressed resides on Wall Street. Are there any arguments on that? No. Okay. The next group is fairly simple. There's three items. A common agreed understanding that the overthrow of the Soviet Union was the greatest tragedy in the history of the workers' movement. If you cannot understand the disaster that has led, then you got a problem being it's rather simple. One simple, that's not hard. No. Next one shouldn't be hard either. And understanding that we need to defend China and what remains of its state ownership from the means of production. That defense of China extends to defense of Cuba, the DPRK, Vietnam, and defense of all nations under attack by U.S. imperialism. Is that a hard requirement? I think it's pretty easy, right? And finally, we need to agree to comradely discussion and debate of all important issues, where all members abide by and support the party position once a decision is made on that issue in accordance with democratic centralism. That's the final one. Is that so difficult a list of requirements? Did I go off in the sectarian direction? No, I hope not. Okay, it's requirements for a united Leninist Party that can act in a disciplined manner to counter the political, military, and economic attacks emanating from Wall Street. I think only the hopeless sectarians and egotists can fear joining such a party. So how do we go from sectarianism to a united party based on what I just outlined? That's not as easy a question to answer, is it? It sounds easy when I wrote it there. It's not so easy when you actually ask me, how do we do it? Yeah. Our history, unfortunately, carries a lot of unfortunate baggage. You know that history. I don't have to explain it to you. In order to get on the unity train, much of that baggage has to be thrown overboard. Okay? We are starting out the fight for a united Leninist movement. I hope the word "we" is correct. Okay? As virtual newborns, trying to grow blindly through the garbage of history that has been left behind that blocks our road ahead. However, our possibilities are enormous. Recent political polls in the U.S. have shown that socialism is preferred by a plurality over capitalism. Those political polls are very superficial, granted, and often indicate a complete lack of understanding exactly of what socialism is. However, they do indicate that large sections of the population will respond to our call if we can get our message to them. And we can't get message to them in all our little sectarian things, and it's completely lost. We can't get that message to them without beginning the process of creating a unified party. What is needed is initiative from political activists like you, not me, I'm just one person, political activists like yourselves, whether you're in a party or an individual activist, to start to promote the idea that we need that unity. In order to unify, there will have to be numerous forums like this one that can lead to bigger and bigger conferences that seriously discuss how that unity can be achieved. I cannot do it on just one individual. My job is to try to light a spark that can lead to a prairie fire. And at my age, the future does not reside with me. It resides with the new generation of activists who are coming to age under these new and difficult conditions. This new generation needs to understand that they have a great responsibility to our class. They have the responsibility of rebuilding a powerful and successful revolutionary Marxist-Leninist movement. I can't do it, they have to do it. I urge every activist to think hard and think long about how to bring this unity about. We cannot continue to work as isolated groups and individuals and have any hope of defeating the ruling class, the most powerful ruling class in the history of the planet. Our unity is the only guarantee for future success. We can win. Will you help us win? Will you go from this room and talk about unity and not be discouraged by all the naysayers? No one else will do this, just you. We are the change we desire to see. Si se puede.
You want to have a question yourself? You want me to, it's a small enough group, do you want to just have people direct, you want me to introduce?
Why don't you do it? That way it'd be best. You know, yeah. I don't want to, you know.
If you really don't want to be on camera, please say, because I will turn the camera when people are talking.
Okay.
Stephanie.
So I just have a burning question, particularly in socialist action, and this has nothing to do with sectarianism, because socialist action, as I've heard rumored and I've had it told to me in person, is a very welcoming group, and we were really around food. So we have a burning question for you, because we recently had a potluck about Trotsky, and what was the topic? Or the failed revolution, right? The failed revolution. Because Ryan, who has come to us via very interesting socialist associations, he's now part of Socialist Action as well. He showed that film, and so we wanted to know if Trotsky ate his bunny rabbits. So we want to know from you, do you eat your bunny rabbits and your ducks?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. If necessary, you know, if you're starving, you do what you have to do. I'm not starving, however. Yeah.
Mr. Gibbs.
I have been in many left-wing organizations. I've been in SDS, I've been in Progressive Labor, I've been in the Global Class 4 Tendency, which is the Marxist group. I've been around the Spartacist League, I've been in the I've been in the Communist Party, I've been in Socialist Action. So I've kind of been in all these organizations, and you know, one of the jokes is, you know, workers of the world unite except leftists. You know, we don't have to. And you know, I've seen similarities in all these groups and differences. I mean, I was an anarchist for a while, anarcho-syndicalist for a little while too. You know, in this room I see 4 political tendencies. I see individual Marxists, and I see some anarcho-syndicalists. And I mean, I'm all for unity, and I've actually been talking about that because, you know, I've seen physically that these groups don't get, they grow to a certain level and then they stop growing, and then people leave, people come, but they're kind of a revolving door with a hard core. They're usually a pyramidal shape with a couple leaders at the top. You can all look at your own groups and see if I'm right or not. But this is the same pattern in every group I've been in. And we even tried to join Workers' World, and you wouldn't let us in the global because you didn't like fascists. Okay? So,
I'm not in my work.
no, I know you're not. But when you were, in this great Leninist organization, so
Were you a fascist?
no, we were Marxist.
Faction.
No, I wasn't. Factions. Yeah. Sorry, no, but they'd be right.
Anyway,
But I'm glad you brought this up. But I think you have to take a step back and I'd like to see a Marxist front, frankly, is the way I look at it. As people who are Marxist would at least get together on that basis, and try to form a workers' front, even a broader coalition. And you see that in Refoundation in Italy, where the Maoists, the Trotskyists, the CPers all got together in one organization and tried to make it work, Refoundation. And, they've had their problems, but they've tried that. You see in Greece, Syriza, which is more of an electoral coalition, but it involves a lot of people, except for the Greek Communist Party. But, and they've made an impact because they're the only force that could stand up, at least in the electoral level, to the austerity period. So, I see that this could be useful, and but whether you call it Marxist-Leninist or I'm more like people have to actually learn to get to the point of in your term, Leninism in an organization, because the Mensheviks and the Bolsheviks were together for about 10 years. In other words, people in the real life have to learn these things. They don't just go, oh yeah, I read this in a book, that's the way we should do it. It doesn't work like that. People have to go through this experience themselves, including the young people that aren't here. But anyway, or not so much here. But there's that, and then I think Germany is actually a better model for what we face than Russia, because Germany, when the revolution was attempted there were many different centers of radicalism. It wasn't just the Spartacusbund. There were the Red Stewards. There were syndicalist uprisings among the different cities. There were.
that was the problem.
Yeah. But the point is in the real world and in America, we have this variegated working class like you're talking about, and levels in the middle class. It's going to happen like that, I think. Much closer than everybody's got this Soviet wet dream, and I've listened to this from leftist after leftist. Oh, it's going to be just like the Bolshevik Revolution. No, it's not. And so I just on the modeling
I don't
part.
believe I said it was going to be just like it.
Well, okay, this was your model, and I think
It's the model.
more realistically, it's going to be more like Germany, and we have, we're going to be dealing with a lot of different moving parts. Left SPD, that joined, a lot of anarcho-syndicalism, working class groups that are on their own. You're going to have geographic. When you tell me that New York City is going to be the capital of the communist movement, I've been listening to people from New York talk to us here in the prairie like we're flyover land for years.
Yeah.
Really, seriously. And we're not. And so, we got leftist groups headquartered here in Minneapolis now. We got some headquartered out in San Francisco. We got some in LA. We got a bunch in New York. PL was in New York. Sparks were in New York. You guys are were in New York, and not you guys, but the group you were in. So you got to remember that there's geographic differences. We're a big country. And it's similar to Germany, where there are all these geographic differences. So I'm glad. My basic is that I'm really happy that you brought this up, and I think people should do something like this.
Let me just answer a little bit, because you brought up very important issues, and I don't want to let them just fly by. Okay. Germany in 1919, after the workers seized Germany, workers had Germany at that point. The problem was they had no party. The problem was that exactly your description. There were all these different organizations this Bolshevik Party had the 1905 revolution. You know, you had that all behind. Here, the workers did not understand that the need for the party. And so even though they had the whole country, they were not able to withstand the bourgeois attack because they did not have an organized leadership to lead them as a unified body. What is the book, What is to be Done by Lenin, deals with this whole parochial situation. The attack was not only on the economics of economism, but it was also an attack on parochialism and localism. He was calling for a national organization. That in there he was stating continuously, local organizations cannot learn if they're not part of the national organization. Each group locally needs to learn from the mistakes and successes of other groups all over the country. And we can only do that with a unified party, a unified organization, and that the party will not grow from the local to the national. It will grow the other way around. Okay? And that the demand for, oh, we have our local groups and this is where it's all going to come from, is what he was denouncing in his seminal work on What is to be Done. In addition, and as an example of how the debate and discussion in the party, the Bolsheviks themselves, was open, so open, is the book I have you bring here today, Materialism versus Imperial Criticism. That was an entire book denouncing members of his own Bolshevik organization for going on the relativist direction. Okay, he was not denouncing somebody else. It was a book put out in a polemic against his own membership of his own party, own organization.
Who is this?
Lenin. Lenin. Okay, what I'm talking about is not a unity with the Mensheviks. You know, they're not going to go along with any of this stuff. We're talking about creating a party that can have that kind of debate within your own organization. Where, if you read what is in the notes, you'll see where Lenin quotes what happened to Engels when Engels put out anti-Düring. Düring was a leading member of his own party. And in that book, anti-Düring was an attack, just like Lenin's attack, was an attack on members of his own party. And his own party, large members of it, tried to get Engels banned from writing anymore for his own party. Okay, at convention and everything. So you can see that when we're talking about the leadership of the communist movement, they encourage debate because you can't get to the next step without discussion and debate. You can't learn without discussion and debate. You can't grow without discussion and debate. And you cannot fear the polemic within your own organization. But when you have an important issue to go forward, you must have the debate to figure out what's the best process, what's the best direction to go in.
Peter?
As we understand that form serves content, I would like to suggest that if we have a unified Leninist party that you have to have a supermajority before democratic centralism would kick in, because with all the differences between the political units that we have presently, we couldn't have democratic centralism around every single issue. So I see for a period of time an evolution.
Well, the Democrats, it's only for the main issues. Only the main
issues, thank you. But maybe to implement the vote, it would require a vote to take the vote. That's my suggestion, just a recommendation.
Well, it's not for me to decide. It would be for the members of the,
As a party formality, it's just a suggestion.
Yes, of course.
All right. Now, points of gratitude. I was happy to find that quote from Lenin. What would you expect our state to be? It can't be anything but a deformed workers' state. I always attributed that to Trotsky and thought that was bad-mouthing the Soviet Union and creating divisions.
Yeah.
That's why I haven't cared for Trotskyists most of my life. The principle that I arrived at in 1975 was Soviet Union is the main enemy of U.S. imperialism, and I have to defend the Soviet Union, and the Trotskyists weren't
exactly with me on that, and neither actually were the Maoists. But I didn't understand, now, referring to the Maoists, this business of Khrushchev attacking Stalin from the right. What was the meaning of that? Well, you've actually explained that to me, so that's helpful. There's still some, as you say, nasty history to things that we're going to have to let go before we can have a united Leninist party. I guess final point would be, sorry, anarchists and anarcho-syndicalists wouldn't fit in a Leninist party, so I don't think you're proposing that.
Of course, they would have to absorb a little more understanding what the struggle's about. But a lot of the anarchists, when they see there's a real fight, will come along, and they will end up in the party. But they can't come in the party as anarchists. That's part of the biggest struggles that have taken place, especially of Marx in the First International against the anarchists and so on. But within our party, where we already agree that we're Leninists, where we already agree that we're fighting U.S. imperialism, we already agree on various different. We should agree that baggage from back then is. You want to believe that? I'm fine. But the issue right now is, how do we defeat U.S. imperialism? How do we do that? And we are not going to do that with these fractionalized little groups everywhere. It doesn't work, and Lenin showed it didn't work, and the whole purpose of the what is to be done was to explain that that can't be.
Tom Dooley.
Should we assume that the term Leninist or Leninism will attract more people than it will push away?
It will attract more people who are attracted to Leninism. Okay, that's my goal. Right now we have Leninists, people calling themselves Leninists, going all different directions. The first job is to get them reverse direction, come back towards each of us. Those who have any good. Those who are not Leninists, they're not going to be attracted to us if we're all split into 100 different groups. They'd see us as all this little. Why would anybody be attracted? It's like, what a mess. I mean, would you? I mean, it is. What does the average person want to do? They want to see their life better. They want to find the people who will lead them in successfully fighting for them. And they look around at people all fighting each other and running in different directions. That ain't them, It ain't them. At least the anarchists fight. For that credit, they actually have more credit than a lot of us. The point being that this is disastrous. This current situation. I love the Greek Party. The Greek Party is, I don't love the fact that they still follow that Stalin stuff and everything like, which prevents them from uniting more people. That's what it does.
You're talking about the Communist Party?
Yes, the Greek. I love the Greek. I love the Greek Party, but they have that sectarianism. Yes, I agree, but it's part of their history. If you know the history of Greece and the bitter situations it's understandable. So how do we get from here to there, where they are also accepting of people so that they aren't just one section of the population, that they bring in the working class, and I'm looking at that. We can't tolerate this type of stuff any longer, even with as much of a party I love as the Greek Party. But because at least they're saying, fight capitalism, fight. They want to fight. They do the fight and everything like that. But fighting is half the more important half is winning the masses. And for that, it takes a little more subtlety.
Is there a stack?
I don't know.
The thing, I know you said you want to unite all humanity, but like I said, I care about more species than just us. And frankly, we are the human animal. And the thing is that the non-human animals and plant life on this planet and other species are being slaughtered.
One of the first things that happened in the Soviet Union after it was overthrown, I think it was Monsanto who came in and clear-cut the forests. If you look at Cuba today, what's the one country in the world that's where the environment is wonderfully protected? Okay, in Cuba. Yes. If capitalism is victorious all over the world, so will the destruction of the planet. I don't. It goes without saying.
Dean?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask what you're feeling about, we talked, in what is to be done, Elena talked about, the problems with when you gain power, the temptation to make compromises. For example, with, like social democrats and so on, where, where if you are, suddenly now if you're in power, and suddenly now you're having to make compromises in terms of agreeing with certain things. What do you think in terms of electoral politics? I mean, if we were to lead a Marxist-Leninist alliance, for example, what would be the view of being involved in the political? I mean,
the Bolsheviks had members in the Duma.
right.
In the struggle, you use all the instruments.
Okay.
You use every instrument, but you have to realize which one is the most important one. But the electoral process is important, okay? But it's not the primary thing. With the other, like the CP and others, they made that primary in many cases, and I'm like, that's leading the workers in the wrong direction. We're in the electoral process, first of all, to take the temperature of the workers. Okay, that's the first thing. First thing, to see which way they're leaning. And secondly, to get our program out. That's pretty much what it comes down to. Make more contacts and so on. But it's nothing more than that. We're going to fight imperialism in the streets, in the workplaces and so on. That's where it's going to happen. But we're going to utilize whatever door is open to us. If it's there, use it. We're not going to, just think, no, I'm not going to use that. That doesn't make any sense. Well, I'll leave it go. I will wait for other questions.
I mean, I think Tom's point about Leninism, because it's so equated with just one section of that, which is Stalinism, because they just sort of equate the two, and they sort of reject the whole idea of the Soviet Union because of the media has, the propaganda and so on. Demonize
at this
Leninism.
point, I really don't like, even as a Trotskyist, I don't like the term Stalinism.
No, I agree.
The reason being, what happened in the Soviet Union was not created by Stalin.
Right.
What
It was not created by Stalin. Even Lenin could not have stopped the bureaucratization that took place. There was a country overwhelmingly peasant. The peasantry is an alien class. You needed them to support, and you needed to support the peasants. But what happened is they were illiterate, much of the working class illiterate. You inherited the czarist bureaucracy. You inherited, most of your Red Army commanders were former czarist officers. So you had a situation where the workers were in Germany, not here in the Great State. They were hoping for the revolution in Germany to save them in a situation, and they had to. The compromises they made weren't because they were evil or something. They had to make compromises with alien class forces to survive. And once they realized the revolution wasn't coming to help them, the political pendulum swung to the right inside the Soviet. Disappointment took place, and the bureaucracy itself became a bigger and bigger problem because their political weight became very strong when that revolutionary movement ebbed in the West. Okay? So you have a situation where compromises are being made out of necessity in many cases. Sometimes they were unnecessary, sometimes they were mistakes were made, and I can say 1,000 times how many mistakes Stalin made, but that's not useful for us here. The thing is that it was an isolated worker state, economically backwards, illiteracy, etc., etc. that is not what Marx envisioned socialism developing on, or what Lenin envisioned it on, or Trotsky, or Stalin, or anything. But economics determines politics, and the economics of that situation determined the politics that followed.
Right.
Okay, and so to put the blame on anybody
Right.
for what happened as a person,
Right.
when it's the economics
Right.
determining it, you're not being a Marxist unless you look at the economics.
Yeah.
Anybody else? I'll get Stephanie, but anybody else?
Steve, did you?
Okay, then Stephanie?
Oh, no, somebody else.
I just, I'm not sure that I take the Soviet Union as the model. I'm a Maoist, you know, but not that, but on the other hand, I find it repugnant that you advocate defending China as a socialist country. And also even the Soviet Union when it fell. And I think that's, I mean, I think, you know, unity, principle unity, I'm very much for that. And you do need a revolutionary party to lead it, but I don't think that the basis of unity that you're putting forward has really been, well, it is correct. Some of it is, and I don't disagree with what you said about Khrushchev, but I think your analysis is incorrect in that was actually the rise of the bourgeoisie within the Soviet Union. I don't think that socialism is, it can be equated, and I think this is the way everybody seems to, from the right wing in the United States, to socialism equals, you know, state ownership or something. It does not. That's way off. So I think in order for this kind of party, which I sort of think it's a good idea, but I think it's going to require a little bit more ideological and political struggle. And I don't even think then that it's going to, you know, the whole U.S. imperialist. I mean, I certainly agree with that. I mean, that's the biggest. It's the biggest problem in the world today, be it in destruction of the planet, or in fascist shit in Egypt to Syria to, you know, name your country these days. So I think there'd have to be more.
I think you bring up two very important items, both in reference to overthrow of the Soviet Union and the defense of China. And I want to take a couple of minutes on that, if you don't mind, because a Marxist does not look at Khrushchev's denunciation of Stalin as the change of the system.
Well, not
Okay, let me finish. Public ownership of the means of production is what state ownership is. When we look and analyze the Soviet Union and China, if we want to understand whether or not it is socialism in part or full or whatever, we look at the status of public ownership of the means of production. That is how you look at the economics to understand the political. So when Khrushchev made this denunciation of Stalin, he didn't touch the ownership of this public ownership. A public ownership of production remained. He could have changed the Constitution entirely. It wouldn't have still been it still would have been a worker state, because the work. Can you please? What made the Soviet Union different was public ownership of the means of production, meaning it's not capitalist owned. The bosses were gone. You're now. That's how we fight against privatization here. The fact is that what the Cold War was about was to destroy public ownership of the means of production. Got the overthrow of the Soviet Union in '91. That's when the public ownership of the means of production in the Soviet Union ended. Politically, the superstructure had changed, but the superstructure is not the system. The system is the economics. And the economics changed over time as under Gorbachev, he started to make economic concessions to the bourgeois elements and so on. And you saw during that period the Soviet Union becoming weaker and weaker as a worker state until the 91 when it was crushed, and the old public workers control over the means of production were handed to the oligarchs. Okay, in China, that process has also gone on a little bit. A little bit. Can you? Let's have some courtesy. What happened? What Khrushchev did in reference to China, and what the other leaders did in reference to China, is what's caused essentially the Cultural Revolution in China. The Chinese country of China was even more peasant percentage-wise than the Soviet Union was at the time of its revolution. After the successful Chinese Communist revolution, they were beginning to get a lot of economic industrial aid from the Soviet Union. But the Soviet leadership were more interested in so-called peaceful coexistence with the United States and the West. And they were totally hostile to China's defense of itself, because the U.S. was putting all kinds of pressure on China. China decided that they needed the nuclear weapon as defense. Okay, the Soviet leadership took that as an attack on their ability to get their own peace, separate peace with the U.S. And they cut off the economic support for China. Plants all over China were left half built, and they pulled out. Now you have this country, mostly peasant country, where you were depending on that highly developed, finally Soviet to be your Germany that the Soviet leaders were looking for to help you, and you pulled it out. A great treacherous act. So what happens then inside of the Communist Party of China? A split develops. For those say, oh, if we can't get aid from the Soviet, we got to get it from the capitalist countries, the capitalist rotors. Okay? So a battle develops within the Communist Party over which road to take. But without the Soviet Union, the capitalist rotors eventually won, because the other side didn't have, economically, the backing. They could not match the other side, because the U.S. was more dominant economically than the Soviet Union was to begin with, and now it was the only route out to go forward for China was to make a deal with the United States. So you have this tremendous battle in China over which road to take. Of course, as a communist, I supported the Cultural Revolution, because that's, I don't want to see the capitalist road. But as a Marxist, I understand why it happened the way it happened. The social and economic weight of the U.S. without the communist leadership under Mao and Lin Biao, without having anything back here economically to answer it with, they were at a huge disadvantage. The question then becomes, well, is it socialist once you're starting making these concessions to the capitalists? Yes, because take an example under feudalism. Dual power existed under feudalism. The bourgeoisie developed within the cities and so on and so forth. But as long as the feudalists remained in power, it was a feudal economy. They owned the land, it was land-based. Only when the capitalists became strong enough to overthrow the feudalists, so you have the two classes the growing battle developing. That's what you're having in China. You have the publicly owned sector, which is still very strong, and a vastly growing capitalist sector, which eventually the two, there has to be a battle at some point, which is going to wipe the other one out. Right now, the advantage is still with the public ownership, but it's tenuous. But as a Marxist, you look at the economics. You don't look at what people say, and this or that. Your analysis always is detailed on what exists. How would Marx analyze China? They would look at the public ownership and how that's controlled. Would look at the capitalists and how they're growing. Would measure the strength of one versus the other, see who's got the upper hand. So you have a developing dual power situation here. And if the capitalists win, they'll do what they did when the overthrow of the Soviet Union took place. And it would be the next worst defeat for the working class in the world. If China goes down, what the hell? You're in really trouble, okay? We have to nurse support for that public sector and hope that the public sector, due to the worldwide situation, is able to defeat the capitalist sector. Because the capitalist sector, they're going to have crises. The economic crises of capitalism, when the crash took place in 2008, 20 million people in the eastern part of China were laid off. Because of socialism, they hired 20 million people to build the infrastructure of China. Some of the biggest projects, public works projects in the history of the world were done. You can't do that in you didn't see that here in the U.S., did you? No. You don't see that in Greece. Their austerity, their cutting and everything like that. Only a worker state, even if it's led by some of the, you can't just go by the word. Some of those people in the leadership of the party, they're even worse than bureaucrats. But you don't look at you don't make your decisions based on personalities. You look at the economists, you look at the system, and you make your judgment on the basis of the system, of what's in the interest of workers here and in China, and what is actually happening on the ground level.
I want to talk about China and that agriculture. It's not the peasants are not an alien class. They are well. Actually, there's Mao made an analysis of the poor peasantry, and there was stratification within that.
Yes.
Within the poor,
Yes.
And he wanted to do a class analysis after, during the Cultural Revolution, but the capitalist rulers wouldn't let him. But the fact is that if you are a capitalist and you run from the top, this society, you can use, because they are afraid of the peasantry and the workers in China. The ruling class in China knows that there is a certain legacy, and it isn't totally lost on even those blood-sucking rulers. It doesn't, they don't miss it. They understand that they've got to do something to keep stability within this country while there's tremendous wealth, flowing. I mean, all these fucking U.S. companies, even the little tiny ones, every company I've worked for in the last umpteen years since the 80s has a factory or is doing something in China and be it Apple or whoever, super exploiting the wage slaves in China, and I don't know. I mean, I think that you can't say just because it's state owned. Who's in the state? Who's benefiting from this? Socialism is not the amount of public ownership. Socialism is the continuing revolution to communism. It is, state ownership is not nothing, and it's one gauge. It's one measure, that's for sure. But the fact is that it's a lot more than that. What direction are you taking society? And the bourgeoisie, in China is taking the workers and the peasants to hell right now as we speak. I mean, I think that this is, for a unified party, which is a great idea. I'm not knocking that, but I think that there's going to have to be more, there's going to have to be more debate on this subject. And I think I don't think that sectarianism is just born out of a bunch of idiots that can't agree on stuff. I think there's real confusion and differences in the real world, and the imperialists have, put their boot down on people and lied through their media day and night.
Mr. Gibbs?
You know, from Marx's front, I don't see that we agree on the whole history of
Oh, no.
socialist movement. Just you know, the discussion is about what some interpretation. You know, if there was a question of defending China from the United States imperialism, I mean, you'd be on favor of that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, you know, in the real, even though you have a different understanding of the class character of China, like we had a forum here where the guy from Fightback, who represents the Chinese, he actually admitted, yeah, I see it going towards capitalism, you know, and you know, which was pretty rare. You know, that's not your view, but
No, but I
even
work
he,
with other Chinese workers,
Let
engineers.
him speak.
yeah, even he understands what's happening in China. But he was here to say, you got to defend China, and of course, behind Russia is China too, and that's the point you're making, you know. So. You know, we're not going to all agree on the whole history of the socialist movement or convince each other that one of us is wrong, the other one's right. And you know, the class character of the state is that's a pretty complicated question.
Yes.
And would we emblazon that on the banners of the United Marxist Front? You must believe that the class character. You know. You might not be able to get to that point right now, but you may. I mean, I'm not sure. But anyway, but there might be you know, more basic things that we can agree on.
Yeah, so I have a question, a practical question. You know, we talked about the average age of the population just here in this room tonight. And, you know, I've now been called not young. So I know I'm not young. But, and that's cool. But, you know, we have a society that is in we have a world that is in dire straits, as Sister Kathleen was saying. And to me, when I'm doing my readings and I'm looking at things, because I'm still new to a lot of this stuff, it always comes down to the biggest problem is industrialization and the rape of the earth. And along with that, now we're compounded with this thing that it has to be the young people that, and supported by us, who are going to come forward and move the revolution along. But a lot of them identify with bourgeois values, and they're used to, even though a lot of them are struggling with massive amounts of debt and homelessness and scarcity issues which are caused by the rape and pillage of the planet, there's still this feeling of, like with the Occupy movement, you know, my college debt, I need a place to live. And it's very much individualized. My revolution, my this, my that. It's part of like a marketing scheme, and it scares me. That's the part that takes my breath away from the possibility of the youth going forward and doing something. I mean, I'm not, you know, people always say, oh, the young people, blah, blah, blah. But I'm nervous about, this is what makes me
Well, that's why I'm here. If we're all focusing on me, there's no internationalism. There's no solidarity. There's no possibility of having a victory. We have to end up changing the me to we. And the fact is that we cannot allow ourselves to accommodate ourselves to people's current thinking. If we do that, then we just get blown from pillar to post. We have to have a basic set of principles, basic idea of where we want to take people. And it's necessary at times to say to the person you like, you're wrong.
Or you've been told wrong.
Or you've been told wrong. Either way, it is something where, for instance, after 9/11, as an example of how people get blown around, political organizations especially. We had when I say we, Workers' World, we had a demonstration scheduled for September 28th on something else entirely. But 9/11 took place. You've got to have the demonstration be about not invading Afghanistan. Now, all the other political parties were running for the hills at the time under the pressure of 9/11. And they all saying to us, no, you're crazy, nobody's coming in, blah, 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 blah. And we're practically hiding under the table. We said, no, that's exactly the time you have to be out. At this moment, you have to be out. And we had 20,000 people there. And the whole movement, look, oh, how did they do that? Under these 17 days after 9/11. You know? The point is, you can't allow yourself to accommodate to the situation. Part of the problem for the so-called Trotskyist movement after World War II, which would have been denounced by Trotsky, by the way, was they accommodated themselves to the situation after World War II, to the right-wing swing, and focused their anger mostly on Stalinism, not on U.S. imperialism. Okay? And so accommodation is opportunism. Sometimes you have to stand in front of people who don't like you, because you're taking up dangerous issues, who say you're wrong. You got to be calm and you got to go and do what you got to do, and that's it. And sometimes it's going to be unpopular. It's not bad to be unpopular. It's a temporary situation.
Go ahead.
And how does that work for unity?
How does that work for unity? Well, it's not up to, I'm all for unity. It's a matter of if others see the world that's around them right now, if they're not frightened by what they saw the U.S. do to the Balkans, to Libya, to Syria, and to what they're threatening to do to Venezuela, and you know Cuba's after that, and you know what they're doing in the Ukraine right now, what they're doing to the people of Greece, what they're doing. If you're not cognizant of how this monster of U.S. imperialism is striding over the world, and at the same time looking at this fractured left and saying that's a picture I don't like seeing. You know, that's how, if you want to put your head in the sand as an ostrich and not see that, then you can't be part of that unity. It's got to be people willing to look at the world without rose-colored glasses, see the problems, and say we got to be together. I know you like Stalin, you like Trotsky, you like whoever it is. That's keep it in your back pocket. We have this struggle, to deal with. Okay, I read Trotsky all the time, and I use it to figure out how to go forward on this. And I'm not going to ditch Trotsky. I'm 1,000% for his position. But that's not the issue here. The issue is here how we as Leninists, I don't care whether you're for Stalin or for whoever it is, if you see this problem, why aren't you together with me? That is, why aren't you there? That's as simple as it. I don't, you may, have everything, I'm selling this book, how Trotsky was working for the Nazis. And I'm like, oh God. It's, in my mind, my head's doing flip-flops, you gotta be kidding me. But I'm not gonna bring that up. That's not the issue that you're for this, I'm for this, let's do it. We'll deal with that some other time.
What happens when you tell people that you're wrong?
Well, it depends. Sometimes they realize they're wrong and they shut up. But a lot of people. Well, usually I have to judge what I say. If I think a person can take it as what you're wrong, then I can say. If I know that this person, that's not the way to come at this person, maybe I'll come the side window instead of the front door. But you have to use your experience and your judgment as to how you approach a person.
But I just want to say, did you hear about the Twitter campaign that happened in Cuba 4 years ago? By AID? They were trying.
Well, they do that everywhere. That's their job.
That's right.
Mr. Gibbs.
If people went to their organizations and said, maybe you should call the people in the other organizations and have a meeting all together. I mean, that'd be the practicable way to do that, and that might attract independents. If there was actually a front of some kind formed, then the independents aren't, who aren't going to join these little tiny groups, unless, I don't know, maybe they will for a while, but a larger organization, it would attract those people, but those people would have to call their central committees, leaderships, and say, hey, call up so-and-so, and have a meeting. That's what you're asking for, isn't it?
I'm asking for the discussion to start as to how to get there, and there may be different roads to get there. That's the way it's life. Some groups will want to be sectarian forever and be in their own thing. But if they're honestly part of the struggle and they want to win, they should want to be bigger and stronger and united. So, and we have to figure out, and it may be private discussions, it may be leadership discussions, whatever way works with me. The only question is, how do we go from this spot here to move either 1 inch or 1 mile forward, whatever way we can. That's it.
What?
Okay, I've been listening to all of this. My experience is collaboration is borne out in the struggle itself. When there's a strike I was in, for example, every group showed up. I mean, because the president was gone, we opened the door. Every group came. You name them, they were there.
Right.
And for the packing house workers that I was working with, it was mass confusion. They did not know who was who, or what the hell they were doing there, or how many newspapers they should buy.
All different.
Or what. Okay. So I see that I view that as, I ask myself, well, what the hell is going on? I was apolitical at that time. I knew I was left, but came from a democratic, left, social democrat party, parents, and what the hell is going on? Why can't all of these people get together? Well, my question now is, realizing that differences exist, my question is, what would be different in the real world if your idea of a collaboration or a unification takes place? What, in concrete terms, would we be able to do then that all of these groups who interact in the movement now do?
Okay, that's the way I look at it from my own experience in struggles. When we had, let's say, the Iraq War, we were able to do tremendous in pulling together big actions and big press conferences and so on and so forth. But the numbers of people who actually put that together were so few. What we need is a more massive organization that in every city, in every area, we would have people who are all part of that same organization that, hey, tomorrow we're going to have national actions against the Iraq War, or this, that, and the other. So it's that coordination. It's that, and then we would all learn from each other what was successful and what was not. With all these little groups, if one little group has success, the other groups don't know the success that ever happened. And in addition, because of their isolation, their impact is only a small area. A national party that's unified, that has people all across the country, can then coordinate a unified response. Whenever the U.S. is threatening, or we're going to bomb Syria tomorrow, well, we need to be able to respond fully, not just as a few people here, but we need to be able to respond right away as a national organization that has connections everywhere. and can show the ruling class here that they've got opposition, real opposition.
But the only authority that that kind of organization has is when the class moves.
All I can tell you is
I know you've been involved in lots of other coalitions.
yes.
I mean, so have I, and a lot of people have. And they've all come together for a purpose, because there was some movement around an issue. And I think the proof is in the pudding. When the issue was important enough, people came out. So, pardon me, but I just don't understand how it would work.
Well, it's the same arguments that Lenin in What Is to Be Done was trying to state. That it was, if we have all these, groupings on a local basis as the base of with all their own little newspaper and their own thing like that, the party itself and the class itself cannot learn. It has to be first on a national basis. In terms of how, if whatever the issue might be tomorrow that comes up, if we have no national, how do we respond? How do we respond in a coordinated way? How do we discuss how do we respond? Part of the problem of having, good thing about our party, you have a discussion going on how to respond. That discussion cannot take place on these individual groups that are all around.
So does everybody put up and say, hey, we set our sectarian differences aside when it comes to this? I mean, that's what we try to do in the coalitions,
You can't
but it
have-
never failed that someone would come in.
I'm talking about factions, not parties. We don't want parties inside of the party. Factions are factions on issues. Okay, you understand the difference?
Yes, sure.
Yes, the faction might have a party base originally, but it's not based on being a party with its own structure. You can't have that inside the party. It's going to be on the basis of an issue, so that when Pravda publicized the different positions of the different factions prior to the votes being taken in the conference, these were factions that took a position, but they were not parties within the party. Party within the party can't be tolerated. Okay, that can't be tolerated.
That makes it clearer to me then.
Yes.
You saw everybody would dissolve their,
Yeah, they would still have their differences. They would still have their political outlook. They would still have how we think we approach things. But the structure of the party is the party, and not several different parties inside of a party.
I just want to say, you said it when you talked about the fact that Stalin, Trotsky, Lenin, and the others in that party, they could have their differences, but when they finally decided on the action to take, they all had to agree.
And that was in the most revolutionary period of the history of the working class in this world, really.
Can I ask you a question, Bud, though? When you were in those organizations, when they were facing an issue, if they gained whatever goal or achieved whatever goal they were aiming at, what would happen? What was the follow? Would they just go back to their daily lives? I mean, was that militancy all lost then after that issue, or that?
to a large part, yes.
I thought that's what you were aiming at.
And that's what I was gonna, that would be the advantage if you had a party.
Well,
You
I
could
think-
probably consolidate
Right.
or perpetuate that momentum.
Right.
But I think the word came up twice this evening, and it's bourgeois, or bourgeoisie. That's the organizing principle of this culture. It's capital, but the cultural expression of that is bourgeois. Whatever, adherence to everything in terms of dress, demeanor, and all of it, that's the model that we're supposed to aspire to. If you're quote-unquote educated, you become a manager or some sort of functionary within that bourgeois system. What is the working class offering people in comparison? If you're training people, what are they going to do for the working class? You know? And there's no model of that in this culture.
I added a little note to the brother on the question of what are we gonna do as workers when we have a little uprising around an issue and 30 groups show up? Well, 30 groups is not a vanguard party, if that's confusion. What do you do when the capitalist system collapses and the bourgeoisie is no good to anybody? And you have to have workers functioning to keep society moving, you have to have the power of the working class or dictatorship of the proletariat, and you don't get it without a viable vanguard party in front of the working class, so they'll take the next step. That's why we have to have a unified Leninist party.
Okay, let me just mention on that. At the time of the revolution, instead of 30 groups you have now, you'll have 300 groups. Okay?
Yeah, really.
You know, I mean, the fact is that when the movement rises, groups come in. Groups, during Vietnam, you had groups everywhere. That's a symptom of a vibrant struggle. A struggle that's not vibrant has no groups at all. I have no problem with all the different groups. What I have a problem is with the Leninists not being united. Good. It's a symbol of a rising struggle with all these people starting to get involved in their own different groupings. That's okay. We're going to fight them ideologically, not physically, but we are organized. We need to be united, because with our ideology, those old groups ain't worth nothing compared to what we can do. Okay? With the power of Leninism is such that it can move millions. We're the little lever that can move mountains. You know, if we are together. But if we're the working class is not together because we're the tip of the spear. Period.
You said that economics determines politics.
Right.
And I agree with that, but what we are is all agents to support an economic structure that is against the working class. We are participants replicating a bourgeois culture. I mean, that's what we have to do every day of our lives. So how do we say one thing and then extricate ourselves from the system that replicates this same
We can't. We are the slaves. We're organizing the slaves to overthrow the lords. You know, so we have to live. We have to eat. We have to organize and live within that system. But that actually, in some ways, gives us more power. If the class sees us as an alien group out there, then they're not going to join with us. But if we're also the workers there, working and so on, yes, we're together to fight. I mean, that's the most important thing is not to worry about all these other groups, but to worry, why are we separated? Why are we messed up this way? And if we're together, we can do so much. We can move this world.
What's gonna happen?
In the corner there,
Yeah, my name's Alan. I'm kind of new to this whole movement, but one thing I have been doing is practicing Buddhism for the last 12 years, and it's a meditation practice. And in Buddhism, we don't see parts. We don't see things broken up into sections. We see unity, totality, and that's one thing I was surprised. I mean, Marx is anti-religion, and I believe he's anti-theistic religion, monotheistic or polytheistic. And I don't know if Marx is truly anti-Buddhism, but I'm surprised that there's very little talk of Buddhism and the values of Buddhism in the socialist movement. And I was wondering what's kind of going on with that, because I never call myself a Buddhist. I say I practice Buddhism, because when I call myself a Buddhist, that's talking about myself as a static self, and not as a being in continuum of the whole. And so I'm segmenting myself into a particular kind of what?
Okay. This is about the class struggle. Okay.
I thought we were talking about unity, though.
No, we're talking about unity of the Marxist-Leninist movement, the class struggle. And classes, this society is driven by class distinction. You have the lords of finance, and you have the wage slaves. And our responsibility in this crisis is to lead the wage slaves and the oppressed peasant or whatever it is to overthrow the lords of finance. And we're the one species, that one section of our own species parasitizes the rest of the species. You know, there's parasites that parasite on other species, but we're the one species that has, actually our own, members of our own species parasitize on our own species. And that can't be ignored. There's no sameness there.
No, I'm not saying anything like that. I'm totally with you on all the economics and all that stuff. What I'm saying is that is there any spirituality in the movement in terms of, there's a teaching of the Buddhas which is called the true truths, which is that there's an absolute truth and a relative truth. And the relative truth is, yes, we all are different people. We're all separate individuals, and the capitalists are definitely separate than the working class, for sure. But at the same time, there's also the absolute truth is that we're all one. And there's, what?
Consumers.
Right, yeah, I mean, there's the absolute truth that we're all one, but the relative truth is that we are separate. But I understand all that, but what you're saying, I understand, but what I'm saying is that if we are going to, if there is going to be a revolution, I believe there has to be a spiritual centeredness to this group. And this is what you're talking about, which is that we do have to be united, we have to get rid of our differences, and we understand that through the spiritual teachings of the last 3,000 years.
I think we're a little bit off the course here. This is, Marxism is virtually the same thing as atheism. And I'll leave it at that.
Wasn't Buddha an atheist?
Buddha was not an atheist, because he didn't go by labels. See, he did not believe in God, nor did he disbelieve in God.
He believed in non-attachment.
That's right, exactly.
Which means he didn't care about the world, and that's
No,
the same
that's-
thing that Christians have.
That's nihilism.
No,
Anyway,
it's not
can
nihilism.
we get
I
back
was a
to
Buddhist for a while, too.
We're off topic.
On the subject tonight, why would it be wrong for us to compose a letter of invitation to the top 5, 6, 7 people of these groups over here that are in town, and say we're gonna have a meeting here and there to be announced, time and place to be announced, and maybe that would break the ice with some of their things.
If that's good, you could do a proposal here, and see if it's seconded and discussed, and that's one of the things that can be done. It's not going to originate from me. I'm putting the idea out. And if that's the way people feel that you can go forward, fine. Or if you can set up other discussions in other cities and so on, so we get something moving on it. But that's a fine proposal, but it could be one of many. But that would be the decision of the body here, not me. Okay.
I don't mean to dismiss what you just said over there, but I hate the word spiritual. It's used way too often. And look at what the Buddhists in Burma did to the Muslims.
Let's not go off.
No.
It's off topic. It's off topic.
Okay.
It's off
I
topic.
want to say, what are you going to do to the bosses? What do you do?
No, I'm not. That's not getting ahead of. First, let's make the revolution. First, let's make the revolution.
Workers make the revolution.
Who's gonna get him a job?
Thanks everybody for coming. We can talk amongst ourselves, great discussion. But I think that's a good place.
Can I put a plug in for MayDay?
Yeah, this was all sponsored by MayDay Books. Oh, Karen, go ahead.
I just wanted to say, I'm not going to be on the camera because I'm
But the
filming.
voice will be.
But I just wanted to say that you don't know this because you're not from here, but there were people here tonight from a lot of different groups. And that was because one of our groups didn't throw this event. MayDay put it out there, and MayDay has the capacity to unite the different groups, which is why, we got to keep supporting this place because this is what brings us together, really.
Wonderful bookstore.
Yes, it is a wonderful bookstore, and people should support it. Absolutely. And I hope everybody felt that they got a good amount out of the discussion.
Thank you, Mark.